Dr. Muhammad Suheyl Umar, sitting in Lahore, Pakistan, an important thought leader, intellectual, scholar, mystic, member of the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders, former director of the Iqbal Academy. It's such a happy moment for me to reunite with you, because when we're together, it's always such a joy and such a rich sharing.
Indeed.
Thank you for making time. I know you've been having various health issues in the family. I'm glad things have settled down. Thank God, not corona related. I'm glad we're here together.
Thank you.
So I can't call you doctor. I mean, you're Suheyl, so that's how it's going to be.
Yes.
A word or two briefly about any particular challenges or opportunities that corona has brought into your life. How has it found you, and what conditions?
Let me limit my remarks to my specific Indian subcontinent environment, and more specifically Pakistan, because there are some particularities and even some peculiarities related to corona that we have faced as a challenge in our environment, which might be of interest to others, and I'm sure these did not occur in other places, not even in other Islamic countries, both East, Arab world, and the Far East. The first of these, which I would describe as a challenge, is that first of all, let's remember that corona arrived in Pakistan much later than the other places, especially the European areas, countries. And when it did arrive, the greatest challenge which we faced was that it was not taken as a human problem or as a health problem, or which belong to the basic human right to live, but as a religious problem. That religious problem in the sense that it impacted some forms of religious practices or some congregational worship. So it's a religious problem. And there was a sentimental reaction, a kind of mix of triumphalism in the first place. Oh, look, this tiny virus has defeated all your strength, all your might in science and technology and medicine. And the other side, the other camp, the secularist camp, came up with, okay, then what is religion doing? Give us a remedy to corona. This kind of absurd debates. But the problematic thing, which I say that it became a religious problem instead of being looked at as a human problem and as a health problem, it became a religious problem with political undertones, is that people completely forgot. And that was my first challenge, or the people who were working in relief work, in awareness work, in other capacities, was to make people realize what the prophetic model told about it, what the earliest Muslim leaders who are far above us in insight, in their religious belief, in their practice, in similar situations, almost similar situations, how did they deal with it, and what is the sentimental reaction and turning it into a religious practice, that mosques should not be closed. That was one thing. And they completely and this social distance, do not touch, do not greet, do not shake hand, etc. They completely forgot that the Prophet himself, when a delegation came to him in which one of the members had leprosy, he told him that ask that person to stay out of the congregation, and his initiation it accepted from distance. Then in a certain tribe, black plague broke out, and he immediately uh, issued orders that nobody would visit that place and nobody would come from that. Then in the next generation, the second caliph, he was about to leave for a state visit to the Mesopotamian regions of the Muslim lands, Muslim government, uh, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, and the adjacent areas. And the news reached him that again Black Plague is playing havoc in these areas. He cancelled his visit. He immediately closed the what they call frontiers and issued orders that no travel between two places. So this is how the prophetic model, the early administrative Islamic administrative model, headed by uh, the one of the famous companions, dealt with this problem. Pakistanis were completely forgetful of it, and they've just looked at in a romanticized way of closing the mosques and putting some restrictions on of those collective worships, acts of worship where the social distance could not be maintained.
What was your role in addressing this first challenge then, before you move to the second?
Yes, obviously it was to remind them of the role models who had dealt with similar situations in the past, and the exact and because they were rooted in the Quranic narrative and the Quranic ethos, that if you save one life, you are saving all of humanity, and if you kill one person, you are as if killing the whole of humanity. So this bringing them this awareness that, look, this is a human problem. This is the basic, the first and foremost purposes or the objectives of Sharia, what they call maqasidu Sharia, the objective of Sharia, that is preservation of human life. And if something has become a threat to the preservation of human life, you should look at it as one of the foremost duties of Sharia as compared to keeping the mosque going or collective worship going.
Were you successful in getting that message across?
Yes, certainly, because it's a mixed thing. In those sectors who are not well educated, or they belong to an ethnic background where religious influence of the religious establishment is stronger, we were less successful. But among the general educated class, which is in majority in the cities, it took a couple of weeks at least that the message started registering. And then people realized that, look, we are not doing anything irreligious. This is the religious model for it, how to deal with such situations. The second challenge which we faced was kind of that conspiracy theory that somebody is doing against, and it was fueled by these unguarded comments emanating from America against China. So that was a smaller problem we could do, and which concerned the Muslim community. The second challenge was that many of the people immediately fell into that kind of a despair, looking at this corona problem as something the beginning of what they call it apocatastasis.
Apocalyptic.
Yes, it's something apocalyptic.
Apocalyptic. The end, meaning the
yes.
end of the world. End of time. Yeah.
End of time. One, or on the other hand, as if God is now breaking his wrath on the Western civilization, and now they are paying for their sins. as if they were comparing it to the great calamities which overtook the nations of old when they transgressed against a prophet. So that was the second challenge, that we had to for them, we have to distinguish them and tell them through Quranic arguments that, look, this process has come to an end with the prophets. Now it's just warnings. And from time to time, providence, as if jolts the humanity out of its slumber, of its neglectfulness and heedlessness. And these are kinds of divine reminders, not an apocalyptic thing or some civilization being punished for their collective transgressions. So these were basically. And the third thing, which was on a very practical level, was our romanticism with religion. That was a popular mass and kind of thing, which mostly related to less educated or uneducated classes, that they would not pay any heed, they would not listen to any medical advice, and keep that romanticized kind of thing, that just our strength of faith and our belief in God and our reliance on God is enough. No medical no medical measures or no health precautions are needed. This kind of a romanticism, which was quite prevalent in some classes, we had to address that as well by, again, giving them religious arguments intelligible for them in an idiom which they could understand, and then they could relate to it. So these were, by and large, the challenges we felt in our immediate environment.
Wow, this is an amazing testimony. In fact, I had personally been looking to see how different religious communities around the world respond. And I was under the impression that on the whole, in the Islamic world, people were compliant. And this is the most amazing testimony. And I will tell you why. And this could actually suggest a very important point of exchange between us. The media, the Western media, is heavily focused on what's happening in the Jewish ultra-Orthodox community. Both in Israel and in the United States, the highest rates of corona infections are in the ultra-Orthodox community. And there are many elements of what you describe as attitude, the romanticized attitude, the priority of keeping the religious institutions open. If I am praying, or if I have faith, or if I fulfill the divine word, nothing will befall me. The skepticism of outside or Western sources of authority. If I didn't know that you were talking about Lahore, I would think you were talking about Brooklyn.
I see.
I have been struggling a lot with the question of what does this mean about sometimes the most intense, most devoted, most faithful groups in Judaism. And why are they acting this way? Why is it, of all religious communities in the world, that the most faithful Jews are the most infected and most publicly problematic? What does that say about that form of religion? So it's a sort of a mixed relief to hear that, oh, finally we found our brethren out there in Lahore. But beyond that, it raises for me the question, and this is to me the contribution of your testimony. What you're making us aware of here is the question of coronavirus as a mirror to religious understanding. The need for religious understanding, and what is the scope of religious understanding? What is correct religious understanding? There's a narrow sense in which you forget earlier precedent, as in the case of the Prophet and his companions. So that's ignorance. So what does that say? That an entire religious community is ignorant and forgetful of its roots. There's a deeper sense, which is, what does it mean for religious understanding to be so simplistic that it's triumphalism in opposition to other cultures, without the broader, universal, humane, cognitively open perspective that characterizes you and your colleagues who are trying to introduce a different kind of Islam. Now, I see the similar situation on the Jewish side. It's much more complex because it's not the ignorant ultra-Orthodox versus some other group, but different shades and understandings within the ultra-Orthodox. Within the same camp, you have one person who's totally obedient to the doctors and one person who's not obedient to the doctors. And why some Hasidim are totally obedient and some Hasidim, in other words, Jewish pietist groups, are totally disobedient. And I've been wrecking my brains to try and find what is the formula. Why is it that some people in the ultra-Orthodox camp could live in Lahore? And why is it that, on the contrary, other people are friends of Muhammad Suheyl Umar? What is it in our religions that allows the simultaneous existence of two types of religious responses? Is it education? Is it ritualism? Is it spirituality? I can't say that the people on the Jewish side, that the people who are ignoring instructions are lacking in spirituality. Some of them have very intense spirituality. In your situation, there may be a correlate. In other words, I'm not assuming that there are universal patterns. It could be that each situation, each country, each community has its own historical conditions and context. And yet, this parallel between what you're describing, what the Jewish community is going through, raises the question of, what does COVID-19 teach us about the mandates and needs for religious understanding, and in what way what kind of religious understanding does the world need today, as COVID-19 points to, both in terms of obedience to civil authorities, but a host of other questions that really point to the fact religions have to grow, we have to have a higher understanding. These are the weak points that are coming to light. So what do you say to all this?
Well, it's quite a complex thing, that given these parallels between two situations and religious understanding, I think it's a question of general decadence in religious communities when the priorities are not accurate. For example, in our situation, the directly Quranically rooted priority should have been preservation of human life. Whereas the secondary things which do not get that priority, which were prioritized. So this is in a kind of deformity in religious understanding, or understanding your own religious tradition in terms of the real priorities of religion. And what the corona crisis, as you say, teaches us or brings to the surface is this equilibrium or lack of proportion which has set in the in the religious community that is in question. I think this is all I can think of.
How does it come to be? You're basically framing the question slightly differently, but ultimately we get to the same point. How does it happen that religious communities lose their priorities? Is it historical memory, spirituality, engagement with other bodies of knowledge? What causes religious communities to lose their priorities?
One word, it's decadence in every, whatever elements you can identify. Every community, every society undergoes this process of decadence. There is no exception to that. And nor the Muslim community, being the youngest, is an exception. So that when this decadence sets in inevitably, فَطَالَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْأَمَدُ فَقَسَتْ قُلُوبُهُم, then long periods of time passed over them and their hearts were hardened. So this impacts all these aspects of spirituality, religious understanding, education, practice, and then the priorities are not as they should be. This is my understanding.
So what we really need are good, not just good religious teachers, but not just good religious leaders, but good religious teachers, great religious teachers, who then have to come periodically and set our priorities straight.
Yes, and this is one of the major functions of the reformers, which both traditions have, that periodically they would see reformers, and sometimes who have claims of a divinely appointed reformer for this to counter that centrifugal movement through their centripetal attraction of bringing back the priorities in order.
Well, people who have an apocalyptic, you corrected the term. You had found a different term. It wasn't apocalyptic. What was it?
Apocatastasis.
Apocatastasis. Could you tell me what that means?
Yeah, the events that take place immediately before the final destruction.
Okay.
The last hour.
Okay. And we had a similar situation here with some people thinking, "Oh, Messiah's coming, Messiah's coming."
Yes.
With all these disasters. But if anything, what this is showing us is when the great teacher comes, what's the work that he, maybe she, needs to do? What is it that's faulty at our religions that requires a big enough teacher, a great enough reformer on spiritual grounds that can help elevate people's understanding? So all the things we see happening along the way, and Corona is a great magnifier of faults, are again an invitation to grow in our religious understanding.
That's right.
So now let's apply that religious understanding to those challenges. And here we can look at some of the questions that we spoke about earlier. So a fearful response and panic. It doesn't sound like there was much panic in Pakistan. People seem to have been more exuberant and panicky. But still, fear sets in eventually. So what is the religious response? A more mature, understanding-based religious response to fear and its various manifestations.
Right. Here again, I would point out that our responses were more of recklessness or a misplaced bravery. To this day, today, we still find examples. If we go out, people carelessly shaking hands and even embracing each other. So when you ask them, look, what are you doing there? And the typical response in our situation is, oh, what does it matter? When death has to come, it has to come. So this kind of reckless, that was fearlessness. That's quite common. But as for, obviously, there is fear. But it's slightly different in a religious society or a predominantly religious society as compared to the fear as it has manifested in the West, where there has been quite a long time a cult of perpetual youth, and all signs of death and reminders of death have been as if thrown under the carpet. And people have lost most of the people have lost any sense of transcendence or what is beyond death. So when this situation suddenly comes upon them, that is a different kind of fear which a secular mind or a secularized mind experiences. But generally speaking, or the positive side of fear with religious people and otherwise as well, is that it reminds you of the human condition, the frailty, the transience of human life. What does it mean to be human? And the inbuilt elements of the human condition. And then this fear can have a positive effect as well of reminding you of who you are and how much and how long you have a time period at your disposal which you do not know. Death is the greatest uncertainty, yet the greatest certainty. And it brings you back to the necessary human humility of looking at your condition, the human condition as it is. So this also happened, that people were turning back towards religion, who were lukewarm or like a Ezekiel. They were also coming through fear. And there was a element of panic as well, especially among those people who are addicted to the media. They were always monitoring the situation through the media, and then the panic infected them as well. So for them, those who are under that kind of a fear, media generated fear, we gave the advice that use media very carefully, use authentic sources and be selective, get the necessary instructions, information, health education, whatever, through authentic sources, but don't be always glued to the media. It only deteriorates. It only throws you into greater panic and brings greater fear.
Amazing how the same input is being given by different religious teachers we speak to in different religions. I hear it across the board, different religions, distance from the media, which to a certain extent means that religion has to have a different perspective, more distant than what shapes most of the collective mind. What about loss? Dealing with loss.
Just a moment, Alon. Another point which is directly related to fear is that there were some voices and some sections of our society which looked at this corona situation as a reaction, as a retaliation, as the first signs of retaliation of the ecosystem of what we have been doing to our host, Mother Earth, and the rape of nature. You know all that, what the modern man, post-enlightenment, and especially with the rise of technology, has been doing to the natural environment. So another kind of another aspect of the sphere was that perhaps it's now the limit has come, and the ecosystem, the environment has reacted in this form, sending its first soldier for the combat. That look, if you keep plundering, and this rape of nature continues unabated, then this might be a reaction. There could be a limit when the ecosystem cannot sustain, and this might be a first symptom of that reaction. That was another kind of fear.
But you're presenting that as something that you had to dispute and disagree with, or you're
no. The kind of fear which people felt.
You know, you'd said earlier that fear of death isn't a bad thing in an Islamic world, in a religious society. One part of it is to remember priorities. another part of a good fear could be, take note, humanity, you're destroying nature. In other words, there is nothing religiously to disprove this fear. It could be a valid application of the principle of fear and caution in interpreting it to consider that this is a response to our abuse of nature. I will say that some of the teachers that I've interviewed for this project teach that. In other words, I don't. You're not suggesting that religiously you find this a faulty argument, are you?
No, not at all, not at all. It was supported by many of the leading spiritual authorities in Pakistan. And if you remember Kabir Halminski's famous article, Artificial Intelligence and Humanity, so it was already in the air. And when the corona set in, they supported it. And they in fact pointed out that, look, this is an indication that nature is now reacting.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So did you want to say something about the loss and religious understanding and loss? How do we apply our religious understanding to the various forms of loss that we experience through corona?
Well, as far as loss is concerned, it's part of it, the whole phenomena. And patience and being the resignation to divine will, whoever is a victim of that, is the only response which we as humans and religious people can give to them. And the consolation is obviously from God. And since the world is the world, this is not paradisal, where there is no fear of the future, no grief for the past, no suffering in the present. So reminding ourselves of our human situation and of the world which it is, the way it is, deprivation has to be tolerated with patience and trust in God.
Well, actually, it sounds like those two people who embraced and said, it'll come to us when it comes to us, already resigned. So it seems like the sense of resignation to divine will extends to both to the popular, uneducated, and to the elite. Is there no other perspective that the more educated can bring to the simple people about how to handle loss, death, loss of money, confinement, all the challenges? Just resignation?
That's yes.
Okay. In that case, we don't have to have this addition to the question. I want to ask you one more question about that really comes through from the Pakistani context. You described as part of the early responses an us versus them mentality. The West versus us, whether you are East or Islam, us versus them. And you described that as part of the primitive mentality that had to be overcome, which then raises the question, to what extent does Corona spiritually provide an opportunity to recognize that we're all one, we're all interconnected, we all have to show solidarity, that we have to go beyond the us versus them, blame came from China, all these pettiness of disunity. And if you think that's the spiritual message, to what extent, what are the Islamic foundations and what are the practical educational or preaching initiatives that you and your colleagues are engaged in to provide that message as part of the Corona spiritual opportunity?
If you remember, I mentioned this in the very initial stages of the Corona crisis, when it has not reached Pakistan. It was only outside. But once it came and that kind of a reaction or that kind of a response was also limited to those who are over concerned with futurism and kind of end of the world type of mentality. So once it was there, the awareness immediately was growing very fast, that look, this is not this and we and us, you and me. This is a human problem, and now it's affecting everybody. Now it's in Pakistan, and if earlier it was only Italy or Spain or elsewhere that was drastically in danger and affected, now it's Pakistan. So to a lesser extent, but still there is. So we should they were forced, in fact, to look at it now not from that I thou perspective or east west perspective, but as a threat which is equally which is something which is threatening equally for all of us.
So what is the Muslim basis for a religious understanding that we're all one?
Well, but in fact, it's ingrained in the Muslim ethos or the Muslim perspective on humanity. That you remember, there is a verse from Sadi which is written on the front of United Nations building. It's in Persian, and it captures what the Islamic message or the Islamic worldview or perspective is on this, the human solidarity or human unity of human race. Sadi's verse goes like this, and there is a reason that United Nations selected it for their front piece of the building. It's Bani Adam Azai Yak Digarand. Sons of Adam are like limbs of one single body. Kidara Farinash Sayak Joharand. Because in their creation, in their generation, they are from the same origin, one same origin. So this shared ground, shared code, humanity, which all of us share, is the basis, the ground for this solidarity or this interconnectedness, which from a Muslim point of view, we try to teach and bring to the forefront of their memories.
Are there any other spiritual lessons that you're drawing from this situation?
Yes, apart from reminders for human frailty and coming out of forgetfulness, the most and the use of solitude to good use, and your reviewing or soul searching about your lifestyle, the fast pace of life, or the loss of family ties, so many things which Corona gave us an opportunity to revisit, to rethink, and to rebuild. Within the families, between families, other relationships, and most importantly, your personal relationship with God. So it gave us many opportunities to review and remove those obstacles which are modern day life and several other factors had imposed on us.
Is there some prayer that you found the most useful and that you appealed to the most during this period?
Yeah, firstly, it's usually the Fatiha. But there are specific short prayers which the Prophet had recommended during the times of this of an epidemic or a large-scale disease or some other kind of difficulty. So we use both. But the gist of all this is already in the Fatiha.
So maybe we conclude this interview by the recitation of the Fatiha. You're explaining and then reciting the Fatiha for us.
Yes. So explaining, you mean I'll translate it. First I recite it and then I'll translate it. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. The translation goes like this. The opening. In the name of God, the infinitely good, the all-merciful. Praise be to God, the Lord of the worlds, the infinitely good, the all-merciful, owner of the day of judgment. Thee we worship, and in Thee we seek help. Guide us upon the way of transcendence, the way of those on whom Thy grace is, not those who deserve anger, not those who are astray. Amen.
Amen. Muhammad Suheyl Umar, thank you very much.